My mom changed overnight, and what took her wasn't human. True horror story. When my mom changed overnight, I thought it was exhaustion, stress, or something normal families quietly deal with. But the woman who walked out of her bedroom the next morning wasn't the mother I knew. Something had entered our home, something that needed a human shape, a voice, and a family to imitate. What took her wasn't human, and by the time we understood that, it was already living inside us too. I was 17 when my mother changed, though the signs were appearing long before I understood what they meant. My family had always been close, steady, predictable. My father worked long hours but always returned to us. My younger sister clung to my mother's routines. And my mother herself lived in a careful rhythm that made the house feel safe. She woke early, prepared our meals, moved through the house with an unbroken calm that sustained us. But a month before the night everything shifted, she began waking at strange hours. I would find her standing in the hallway, rigid and motionless, her eyes unfocused as though she were listening to something inside the walls. Sometimes she stood there for entire minutes before noticing me nearby. She would blink slowly, step back into her room, and pretend nothing strange had happened. My father dismissed it as exhaustion, and my sister didn't notice anything unusual, but I felt a heaviness every time she froze like that. It was as though the house itself paused with her, waiting to see what she would become. The night it happened, our home felt unusually still. There was no wind outside, no shifting branches, no familiar hum from the heater. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I woke in the early hours, unsure what had disturbed me, and felt an unnatural coldness in the hallway. The temperature dropped quickly, as if something had passed through the space moments earlier. I walked toward my mother's room, driven by a tightening dread I couldn't reason away. Her door wasn't fully closed, something she never allowed. A thin line of darkness slipped through the opening and felt almost alive, as though the shadows were moving on their own. I pushed the door slightly and saw her standing in the corner, facing the wall. The position was unnatural, her neck bent at an angle she had never held before. Her breathing was slow, too slow, as if whatever kept her alive was forgetting the rhythm of a human body. I wanted to call out, but my voice wouldn't form. The air felt thick, as though the room itself rejected sound. I stepped back and returned to my room, shaken, trying to convince myself I had misinterpreted what I saw. I lay awake until morning, unable to shake the feeling that something had entered her room with her. When morning arrived, the woman who emerged wasn't my mother. Her posture was too straight, her movements too mechanical. She walked without the small gestures she always made, gestures I had unconsciously memorized from years of familiarity. She didn't touch the kitchen counter as she passed, didn't hum the faint tune she always hummed, didn't glance into the living room to check on my sister. Instead, she moved with a strange deliberation, as though her body was a new place she was learning to navigate. Her face looked normal, yet wrong. The skin around her eyes seemed tighter. Her mouth held a faint expression she had never worn. Not a smile, not a frown, something in between, as if she were mimicking a feeling she didn't understand. She ate too slowly, swallowing each bite as though analyzing the process. When she lifted her head, her eyes seemed to focus a fraction of a second too late. My father was oblivious at first. He spoke to her without noticing the absence of her warmth, the hollowness behind her movements. My sister was uneasy but didn't have the words to express it. I, however, felt a suffocating certainty. Something else was inside her, something that didn't belong to this world. Over the next days, her transformation deepened. I found her staring at the ceiling for long stretches of time, as though studying something none of us could see. She stopped sleeping entirely. At night I heard soft footsteps pacing in the hallway, slow and rhythmic, pausing occasionally outside each bedroom door. Each pause felt intentional, as though she were evaluating us. I began noticing subtle distortions in her reflection. When she passed a mirror, her movements inside it lagged behind her real body by a fraction of a second. When she leaned close to the surface, her reflection seemed to breathe differently. The changes were small, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. She avoided mirrors after that, turning her head sharply whenever she approached one, as though whatever inhabited her despised its own incomplete imitation. On the fifth night, I found her standing outside my door again. Her body was motionless, but the air around her felt charged, vibrating faintly with something unseen. I pretended to sleep, even though my heart pounded so loudly I feared she would hear it. She lingered for several minutes before drifting away, her footsteps unusually soft, as though she had learned to move in a way humans weren't meant to. My father finally began noticing small abnormalities. My mother's voice lost its natural cadence, her responses came at strange intervals, and her presence carried a coldness that unsettled him. He tried reasoning with her, but her blank expressions only deepened his confusion. My sister clung to me at night, whispering that Mom didn't feel like Mom anymore. The fear in her trembling hands told me she sensed something I could no longer deny. The house itself seemed to shift with her presence. The walls creaked in patterns as though responding to her movements. The lights flickered when she entered certain rooms. The air thickened with an indescribable tension, a heaviness that only lifted when she was absent. The moment I realized the thing inside her was learning us came unexpectedly. I was walking past the bathroom when I saw her inside, standing before the mirror. She was observing herself with a strange intensity, tilting her head in small increments, studying her expression as though practicing it. Her reflection was wrong again, delayed, almost resisting her. And then it happened. Her reflection smiled, slowly, deliberately, before her real face did. That was the moment my denial died. Something had taken her place, and whatever it wasn't finished with us. After seeing my mother's reflection move on its own, I could no longer pretend anything normal was happening inside our home. I spent that night awake, listening to her footsteps glide back and forth in the hallway. They didn't sound like human footsteps anymore. There was no subtle shift of weight, no quiet tap of heel then toe. Instead, the movement reminded me of something drifting just above the floor, almost suspended. The air in my room felt colder each time she passed my door. I pressed my back against the wall and tried to keep my breathing steady. I was afraid that if she sensed my wakefulness, she would open the door and see me not as her child, but as something she needed. By morning, the house felt wrong in a new way. The shadows clung too tightly to the corners, and the air tasted metallic when I breathed. My sister followed me everywhere, terrified to be alone. Even my father, who had tried rationalizing everything until now, walked through the house with tension in his shoulders. He no longer met my mother's eyes for more than a second. Whenever she entered a room, he stiffened instinctively, as though he were sensing a predator nearby. But he didn't know what to do. None of us did. The creature inside my mother was evolving. It moved with a growing confidence, as if the disguise was fitting better each day. The small mistakes it made early on, delayed reactions, unnatural posture, unfamiliar movements, were disappearing. It was learning her habits, her gestures, the way she carried herself. But despite that, the coldness remained. The emptiness in her gaze deepened, like an awareness forming behind her eyes that didn't belong to any human mind. It watched us, not with curiosity, but with calculation. I felt it studying our behaviors, waiting for something I couldn't identify. The house responded to it more intensely now. Doors swelled shut without locking. The floor shifted in gentle waves beneath our feet. The lights dimmed when my mother approached. Even when she wasn't in sight, her presence pressed against the edges of every room. It felt like the house was breathing with her, or perhaps for her, as though something had merged with the structure itself. Sometimes I heard faint whispers inside the walls, though never words, just sounds like distant breathing or soft scraping. My sister said she heard something calling her name at night, but I refused to let her finish explaining. The fear in her trembling voice told me enough. My father finally confronted the situation in his own way. He began researching late into the night, filling notebooks with theories that ranged from sleep disorders to supernatural interference. The stress consumed him quickly. He slept little and ate even less. He avoided my mother whenever possible, slipping around her like a man avoiding the edge of a cliff. When she approached him with that unnatural calm, he visibly recoiled. The creature noticed this, and something in its expression shifted each time, an almost imperceptible tightening around the mouth, like irritation or amusement. One evening, while sitting in the living room, I felt a sudden shift in the atmosphere, like a storm building within the walls. My mother appeared in the doorway, standing perfectly still. The air thickened with a pressure I had never felt before, as though the house was exhaling slowly. Her head tilted slightly, the same way it had that first night, but this time the movement felt more deliberate. My father froze beside me. My sister buried her face in my arm. I didn't move. I couldn't. My mother, no, the thing wearing her body, was staring at us with a focus that made my skin crawl. It felt like a judgment, an appraisal, a decision being finalized. After several silent moments, she turned and walked deeper into the house, moving with a fluid grace that no longer resembled my mother at all. The moment she left the room, the pressure lifted, but the fear remained. My father whispered that we needed to leave. The plan was simple: wait until she went to her room, then quietly wake my sister and slip out the front door. But as the night grew darker, the house felt more alive than ever. The walls creaked in patterns that resembled breathing, and the shadows along the hallway shifted as though reacting to our movements. We waited until nearly dawn, terrified to make the first move. When we finally tried to leave, the front door refused to open. It wasn't locked. It wouldn't move at all, as if the house itself resisted our escape. The windows wouldn't budge either. My father tried prying one open, but his hands slipped off the glass as though an invisible force pushed them away. My sister began crying softly. I held her close and tried to steady my own panic. We were trapped, not by locks or barriers, but by something unseen that wrapped around the house like a second skin. We returned to the living room, defeated, and waited. Just before sunrise, my mother emerged again. Her appearance had changed subtly overnight. The skin around her eyes seemed darker, almost bruised, and her expression carried a strange, unsettling calm. But the most terrifying change was the way she moved. She no longer walked with human hesitation. She glided, weightless, her feet touching the floor only as an afterthought. The house silent around her, as though acknowledging its host. She approached us slowly, and in that moment I felt something inside me shift, a sharp, icy sensation that spread through my spine. It was as though the air around her reached out, brushing against me like invisible fingers. My sister whimpered and clung tighter. My father stood in front of us, trying to shield us even though he trembled uncontrollably. My mother paused just inches away and lowered her head slightly. For a moment, I believed she could see through me. Then her eyes changed. The pupils widened until the darkness consumed nearly the entire iris. In that instant, her expression dissolved into something primal, ancient, and void of humanity. Whatever lived inside her had finally surfaced, no longer pretending to be her at all. The house groaned under the weight of her presence. The lights flickered violently. The walls seemed to ripple like a living organism responding to the creature it housed. A low vibration crawled across the floor and up my legs, settling deep into my chest. I felt something enter me, not fully, not completely, but enough to leave a mark. An imprint. A claim. And in that moment, I understood the truth. The creature had not come merely to inhabit my mother. It had come to spread itself, to adapt, to live through us. And it had already chosen its next host. If you think the story ends here, you're wrong. What took my mother didn't stop with her, and the thing it left inside me still wakes every night, waiting for its turn. If you want to hear what happened after we escaped the house, subscribe now. The next part of this true horror story is darker, realer, and far more disturbing than anything you've heard so far. Trust me, you'll want to be prepared.